So the next thing that we're going to look at is landscape regions, and these landscape regions are created by the different geologic process, weathering, erosion, and the plates colliding, crustal uplift, subsidence. All these processes that we've talked about so far this year, and this is a decent place to go over this after we talked about geologic history. If we look, landscape is the the interaction of the movement of plates and the type of climate and the bedrock, what the rocks are made out of. This relief is not a term that's in the notes sheet. You can just put it right underneath landscape there on the sheet. Relief is the change from the highest elevation to the lowest point. So if something has a big relief, it has a big change from the highest point to the lowest point. If there's not much relief, there's not much change from the highest point to the lowest point, so it's going to be fairly flat in that landscape. And I'll talk about relief a little bit more when we're looking at the examples here. So the the different landscapes are shaped by the crust, the climate, and that gives different relief, different changes in elevation, and we give them different names. So the first thing that we'll look at are we have mountains, ridges, plateaus, and plains, and we'll look at each of those sort of in turn. If we look at the mountain ranges, they have a high relief, so there's a big change in elevation, here at A, and we have deep valleys, high mountains. The bedrock itself has been tilted and faulted because that's when those plates collide together. It causes the bedrock to be buckled or to be bent, and that ends up causing the bedrock underneath. And when I say the bedrock, it's what the rocks are under the ground. It causes them to be tilted and turned and faulted. That's different from someplace that has moderate relief, so in between the highest relief and the lowest relief. And these ridges have folded bedrock. You can see that when the plates collided, they folded these bedrocks. You have a plateau, which has moderate to high relief. So our areas would be considered a plateau. We have hills and valleys in our area, but not huge mountains. And the thing that distinguishes us from ridges or from mountains is that the bedrock around us is horizontal. So again, those sedimentary layers get laid down in horizontal layers for a wide area, and they stay that way because the plates haven't collided in enough of a way to cause them to be tilted or folded. And then the plains are areas where you have low elevation, and that causes very low relief, and the bedrock is horizontal. So the combination of the type of relief it has and whether the bedrock is horizontal or tilted or faulted and folded determines what kind of landscape region you're going to be in. And I'll show you some examples here. This shows mountainous regions. You can see the curving nature of the mountains. The bedrock layers were folded. These are most likely metamorphosed layers of bedrock, and so you can see that these bands the layers are folded like that. When we get into a plateau, this looks more like our landscape. These underneath, if you were to dig down into these layers, or if you were to look at an outcrop, you would see horizontal layers, and the layers or the area has been eroded away, weathered and eroded away by water, causing these valleys. And then the plains are just flat places. There's not much relief. The weathering hasn't worn it down. And as you can see, if I go back to this picture, the reason why we have any relief here is because of erosion. It cut down into those horizontal layers. Whereas the reason we have relief over in the mountains is because of the colliding of those plates. The other examples, valleys have low relief. Any type of bedrock can have valleys in it. So this is an example of a part of one of those other landscape regions. An escarpment is a transition zone that has a major elevation between one area and the next. lots of times caused by faults, so that when a fault happens, those blocks of rock are shifted up, and that chunk that's lifted up creates a cliff, which is where you get that escarpment. And so we get these hills and valleys, oftentimes where you get plates colliding. We see this down in Pennsylvania, where you have a series of ridges and then the valleys in between. And then you have an escarpment here where you see a cliff transitioning down into sort of the plains. The things that affect the landscape, geologic features, are crustal movement, collision boundaries creating mountains, and uplifting and erosion, forming plateaus. The type of bedrock, so some areas, some parts of the rock may be more resistant and won't weather as fast as less resistant rock. That can cause the plateaus to wear down in certain areas and not others, or create valleys in some places and not others. And then finally, the climate. And this is an important distinction, because this would be like someplace out in Arizona or out in a very arid climate. This would be arid climate, the Southwest, and this area over here would probably be someplace a little bit closer to home, the Northeast, because if we look at the example, the reason we have these that look like this, my head's getting cut off, put myself down here, but we have both horizontal bedrock here, but the erosion is affected differently because of the climate. Dry, arid places, you don't get a lot of plant growth, and so there's not enough root structure to hold the soil in, and so that causes the erosion, the pickup and carrying of those materials far away, and so you get more jagged cliffs. Whereas around here, we get a lot of plant growth, and that causes us to have these valleys and hills be more rounded, because they hold onto the soil a little bit more. So we get more rounded hills in our area in New York. That's all for now for landscapes. We'll talk about different stream drainage systems in the next video.